Now it's my pleasure to introduce the Director of Corporate Communications, and John, I love me some Kwik Trip, which I've already pretty much established with you, and I don't want to steal any more of your time, but we couldn't be more excited to have you here. Give him a warm welcome, John McHugh.
I know none of you in the room know me. The people that do know me, I hope they would say I'm a good human being. But I'm very ashamed to say that I have an FBI record. And because I have an FBI record, my sister at one point in time did not get her dream job. Now Keith is probably thinking, we thought we booked a great speaker here, we got the Unabomber on our hands, what's going on here? This is a classic example of not thinking about the ramifications of what I was doing. When I was a senior in high school, I grew up near Wausau, Wisconsin. I grew up in a little town called Hallie, town of 300. I went to D.C. Everest Public High School. Junior and senior years, I was allowed to do an independent study program in mathematics and science, an accelerated program. And as a result of those 2 years, I ended up designing something called an OTV. It's an acronym. It means Orbital Transfer Vehicle. It was this little spaceship that was designed to go in the cargo bay of the space shuttle. The space shuttle would go into Earth orbit. The smaller ship would come out and it would go to the moon and back. It was based off of existing technologies from the old Apollo missions from the 60s, the shuttle program, and from a rocket engine that Rockwell International had been designing at the time called an OE-1. I wrote a 50-page paper on this and presented at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and finished first in the state in the area of physics. So I got sent to West Point, New York to represent the state of Wisconsin in the National Science Fair. Well, in the course of these studies, I found out this, that NASA was deciding whether or not it was going to go back to the moon. And if they were going to require about 8,500 pounds of supplies on a regular basis to keep those astronauts going. Food, water, oxygen, the things you can't find on the moon. Well, in the course of these studies, this little ship I designed could carry 10,000 pounds of supplies, more than what NASA needed. And fully loaded, this little ship would come in at 59,500 pounds. The shuttle had a payload carrying capacity of 65,000 pounds, all within NASA's parameters. Well, the linchpin of the whole study was that you needed a rocket that got a lot of miles to the gallon. So if you took this rocket engine and you used monomethylhydrazine as a fuel, and then you combined an oxidizer with it, because in space there's no oxygen, so you have to provide that artificially so something burns. If you used nitrogen tetroxide as an oxidizer, and you added a third chemical to it, a type of chloramine, you got something called a high specific impulse. It's a fancy term. It means you get a lot of miles to the gallon. You get a lot of miles to the gallon, that much less fuel you have to carry, that much more space for payload, all fits NASA's parameters. So I wrote to a company in California and I asked for a half an ounce of that type of chloramine. Test the chemical property. You know where this story's going. And I wrote to the company and I waited. And I waited. And I waited. And finally one night there's a knock on the door. And my dad answers the door, and he was John McHugh Sr. I'm John McHugh Jr. My dad never graduated high school. He made Jeff Foxworthy look like a cultured genius. My dad used four-letter words as nouns, adjectives, adverbs, commas, prepositions. Smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Ate the fat off the pork chop because, Johnny, that's where all the flavor's at. It's in the fat. And most of the liquid that he consumed was fermented in nature. So my dad answers the door, and it's the Marathon County Sheriff, Leo Ginoli. Some of you might remember that name. And 2 FBI agents. And they said, are you John McHugh? Yes. What do you want with a half an ounce of chloramine? And my dad said, what the is chloramine? And all of a sudden it dawned on him, Johnny, get over here. And I was in the deepest doo-doo of my life. Because if you take a half an ounce of that chemical and you heat it to 150 degrees, which you can easily do on your kitchen stove, it's enough to level a 1-mile hill. It's why you get a lot of miles to the gallon out of it. It's highly explosive. So the company in California thought it was some nutcase in central Wisconsin building a bomb in his basement. So they contacted the authorities and said, you need to go see what's going on. We think we found the Unabomber, you know? Well, I had to bring all the guys into my bedroom, and I'm going to date myself on this one. I had to power up my Texas Instruments computer when you save data on a cassette player and show them I was just this nerdy, geeky kid designing a rocket. You know, it wasn't the Unabomber. And because of that, I ended up with an FBI record for the knowledge of dangerous chemicals. It says exactly in my file what the chemical is. And for the sake of national security, that's a good thing, because if something's ever blown up and the chemical residue is chloramine, they have a short list of yahoos to come after, and I'm one of them. But jump ahead now 8 years later. My sister was in the Air Force. It was her goal to stay in 20 years. She was a chef by trade. And she got recruited. She got recruited for her dream job, to be the head chef for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C. Wow. And if you have military background, you know what kind of military clearance, security clearance you need to work with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And it took them all of 30 seconds to go back in the database and find out that her immediate biological sibling is on the FBI list. And those of you who have background, you know that that means you don't get that level of security clearance. My sister didn't get the job. She didn't talk to me for a couple months. And she'll be home next weekend, and that's still one of the topics that we never bring up in the McHugh household. And it was a classic example where I think I'm a decent human being, but you know what? I didn't take a step back and say, you know what, hang on. Is there an ethical implication to what I'm doing? Is what I'm doing, could that ultimately impact my career or someone I love's career? Could that impact others in the community? Because I think so often as good leaders and men, sometimes we don't take a step further and ask the question, hang on, let's think about this. And because of that, from that day forward, there's something that I do every morning. I live nice 7 acres outside La Crosse, nice log home. I have a Four Seasons room. I sit down there in the morning, starting at 6 o'clock a.m., and I ask 2 questions. Number 1, before I go into work today, what do you need me to do today? What do you need me to do today? Not what do I want to do today, or what does my boss even want me to do? What do I need to do that you want me to do? And then the second question, more important, what do you need me to do today that will matter for all of eternity? And when you ask that question, for me it colors the rest of my day. And the staff at Kwik Trip knows how I do this, because sometimes in the midst of the senior management team on Monday, if they start debating, well, should we be selling third-pound hot dogs or quarter-pound hot dogs on the roller grill, and they get in a big fight about it, and I'll say this, guys, at the end of the day, what will really matter? And it puts things in perspective. Well, I know this breaks all the rules of PowerPoint presentations. It's got way too many words on the screen, but this quote is too good to pass up. This guy, Jim Collins, he's a business author. He writes about what makes successful organizations and businesses successful. He's not a religion teacher. He's not a poet. He's not a philosopher. He writes about business, but this is what he says. If you want your business, your organization to be 16 times more profitable than the stock market average, make sure everybody can plug into this statement. For in the end, it's impossible to have a great life unless it's a meaningful life. It's very difficult to have meaningful life without meaningful work. Perhaps then you might gain that rare tranquility that comes from knowing that you've had a hand in creating something of intrinsic excellence that makes a contribution. Indeed, you might even gain that deepest of all satisfactions, knowing that your short time here on this earth has been well spent and that it mattered. That's a business author, and he's done the studies, and he's shown that if you plug into that and your employees plug into that, they're 16 times more successful than anything in the stock market. It's a sense of purpose. Well, one of the things I do in my job is I go throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, our market, and I talk about finding that sense of purpose at work. Well, 2 years ago, I was over in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. 2-hour presentation to the senior management team of Mercury Marine. About 50 guys in the room, and as I'm doing my presentation, their lead engineer was in the back of the room. Big, tough guy, balding, probably late 50s. Looked like the kind of guy that if it was closing time at the bar, said you wouldn't mess with this guy because he'd mess with you. And I can tell by the look on this guy's face that he's not buying what I'm selling. And so at the end of the presentation, I said, any questions? Comments? Concerns? And he shoots his hand up. And he points to the presentation. He said, that is a load of fill in the blank. He said, there's no purpose in what I do. I design and build boat motors. It's a job. What's the purpose in that? I said, sir, can I have 5 minutes? The first 7 years of my life, my family lived in South Milwaukee. My dad worked in construction. And if things hadn't gone well at the job site that day, we knew about it when Dad got home. You know that old adage that if something happens at work, you leave it at work, you don't bring it home? That's not true in the McHugh household. It wasn't. Dad had an Irish temper, and if it didn't go well at work, we knew about it. But my dad's attitude and his disposition, his relation to all of us in the family, changed completely at the beginning of every summer. And this is how it changed. It started on Memorial Day weekend. Dad would show up from work about 5 o'clock, and he would back our 1973 Dodge Charger up to that trailer and that boat. It's got a Mercury Marine on the back. And then we would drive 5 hours north up to northern Wisconsin, up old Highway 51. Those of you remember when Highway 51 was still 2 lanes going through Wausau and Merrill. We'd get north of Mercer to a little place called Pine Lake. We'd get there about 11 o'clock at night. Dad would put the boat in the water. I was 4 years old at the time. He'd put me in the boat. And then he and I would drive out to the middle of the lake, turn the boat motor off, and he'd put my life jacket on nice and tight. And then he'd put me in his arms and go, and a 1, and a 2, and he'd throw me in the lake. And Dad would come in and we'd go swim until about midnight. And for the next 2.5 days, my dad's attitude completely changed. He was fun to be with. He was relaxed. It's not like he was my dad, but he was like the ideal older brother. And then on Memorial Day, at noon, Dad would put the boat back on the trailer. We'd drive 5 hours south back to Milwaukee, down 51, cut over through Point, catch Highway 41, going through Fond du Lac, past the Mercury Marine plant. And I was in the back seat, 4 years old, and Dad would always say to me, "Johnny, look out the window. You see that big building? That's the home of the boat motor." And I remember being a little boy in the back seat of that car looking at that building, being so grateful that it existed. Because something was built in that building that changed my dad. That some of the best memories I'll ever have of my dad, who's now gone 9 years, is because of that building. And I said, "Sir, I don't know if you were working at Mercury Marine at the time, but if you were, I want to thank you for creating something that changed my father." Big tough engineer, tears just streaming down his cheeks. And he walked out that afternoon and he said, "Thank you for reminding me that my job has a purpose. I realize that I don't simply build boat motors. I realize that I bring joy to people's lives. And there's a difference." I'm a firm believer that almost every job on this planet has a purpose that makes our world a better place. And internally at Kwik Trip, we're not, in terms of our business model, we're not this. First day of training for any of our coworkers, we don't tell them that the most important part of their job is selling gasoline and hot dogs. Matter of fact, we come real clear. If you think the most important part of your job is selling gasoline and hot dogs, you've already flunked the Kwik Trip School of Business. Because all 18,500 of our coworkers, on the very first day, we stress that the most important part of your job is living this. To serve our customers and community more effectively than anyone else by treating our customers, coworkers, and suppliers as we personally would like to be treated to make a difference in someone's life. You all recognize it. It's the golden rule. It's the golden rule applied to business. And our owners, we're privately owned. Don Zietler will say that that's what we're all about. And at the end of the day, after you do this, you might end up selling some stuff to people. But that's not the primary purpose. Well, my hope is that if you go in our stores, that you'll experience people who are good to you, who are compassionate. We don't train this in any of our people. We talk about it, but we don't train it. Because you know what? I'm in charge of the training program, and I can be honest and tell you, we don't have a very great training program. There's no way that we can possibly train 18,500 people. It's not about the training, it's about the hiring. So for the first 3 questions in the interview process, this is what we ask every single candidate. Someone working in the store, making the donut, delivering the donut. Number 1, tell me about the last random act of kindness you did for someone. Number 2, how have you made a difference in someone's life this last month? And number 3, how have you treated others as you personally would like to be treated in the last 6 weeks? We're asking if they live the golden rule by their nature. Because if they don't live it already, there's not a thing I can do to change that. If they're bad to the bone, not a training program on the planet, it's going to fix it. And so it's not about the training for us, it's about just hiring good people. And so we hire good people and say, don't go at it, just go do it, live it, celebrate it. Well, the good news is for us, when you create a culture, a corporate culture where there's goodness, and you celebrate that goodness, goodness that's celebrated inspires more goodness. It creates more goodness. Back in 2004, that year, we received 14 unsolicited guest compliment letters. People that wrote to the corporate office in the Crosse said, hey, I had a great experience at Kwik Trip. So I said to Don, what do you do with the letters? He said, well, they go in a drawer someplace. I said, how about this? How about if every Wednesday when we send the little newsletter to all the stores, the first page, we publish that letter? And if we know who the coworker was that did it, let's acknowledge the great thing that they did. And what they do is they actually get a gift card from my department for a website. They plug in their code. They get a gift valued at between $80 and $100. People say, well, geez, hang on, we should just do the good things because it's the good things to do. We should do it out of the sake of humility. You shouldn't brag about it. Well, we don't do it to brag. We do it because we believe if you create a culture where goodness is talked about and it's celebrated, it inspires more goodness. And here's the reason why. If I want to influence your behavior, I can do a bunch of policies and rules. Problem is that there's a part of your brain called your cerebral cortex, front of your noggin. It remembers things like physics, theory, math. The problem is it doesn't remember that information for very long. That includes policies at work. There's another part of your brain deep inside your brainstem. It's called your limbic brain. It remembers things like stories and stories with emotional content. And if I can touch your limbic brain, you'll remember that lesson at least 15 times longer than anything in your cerebral cortex. So if I tell you a story of goodness, and then you get put in a similar situation, you know what you'll remember? That story, and you'll repeat that behavior that you heard about, that was celebrated. I'll give you the first example. In 2005, we actually celebrated this with all the coworkers that year. We do these year-end meetings in December with all of our coworkers. That year, someone wrote in and said, I was stranded by the side of the road. I ran out of gas. It was on E. It was really on E. And one of your store leaders stopped behind me and said, is there a problem? He said, yeah, I'm embarrassed. I'm out of gas. Can I borrow your cell phone? I got to call AAA. She said, well, I work for Kwik Trip. I'm the store leader. We have a little gallon can for the lawnmower. I'll go to the store and I'll get you a gallon of gas. So she brought him a gallon of gas. He got his truck started. He said, this is awesome. I'm still going to make it to work on time. What do I owe you, $50? She said, no, just pay it forward. So we did a little video reenactment of that story. You know what happened with a number of unsolicited guests the next year who wrote in and said, I was stranded by the side of the road. Someone gave me gas. It was one of your employees that they didn't charge me for it. The number just skyrocketed. Is it when you create a culture of goodness and kindness, it creates more? Let me give you one of my favorite examples from this last year. I'll read it to you. I'm a regular customer at your Sheboygan store. In the past, my family has caused this store a lot of problems because my son constantly steals from them. It's not a good thing in our industry, in case you're wondering. Your staff has always treated me with respect, even though my child has done this. On a side note, my family and I do not have much. My son went to the store on Saturday in February, and he had no socks on because we just don't have money right now for new ones. It was snowing pretty badly, and one of the staff members was outside shoveling. My son was sitting on the curb cleaning the snow out of his shoes. Your staff member, Matt, came up to my son and asked if he was okay. He helped my son clean the snow out of his shoes, and then gave my son his own socks off his feet. It gives a whole new meaning to giving someone the shirt off your back. Your staff continues to show respect to me even after my child's mistakes that cost them time and money. Thank you for hiring caring people. Well, I was so touched when I got the letter, I contacted Jess, the store leader. I said, Jess, this is really neat. Were you there when it happened? And this is what Jess emailed back. John, I was working when this happened. The worker came back to me after he did this, and he sat down in my office, and he cried because he felt so badly for the kid. I was very proud of my coworker. His name is Matt. He'll be with our company a year this May. He's 18 years old and still in high school. Kids these days, huh? You know? I contacted Matt. I said, Matt, why did you do it? He said, you told me the very first day in the job that the most important thing I was supposed to do is not sell gasoline and hot dogs. You told me that I was supposed to treat others as you'd like to be treated. I recognize that. That's how my parents raised me. And I always thought, geez, if I didn't have socks and someone else did, I hope they would share with me. I was just trying to do what you asked me to do. You know? Live the golden rule. And you create a culture where that gets celebrated, it grows. This last year, I actually need to update this number, I apologize. The exact number, in 2016, we received 1,426 unsolicited guest compliment letters. They get published every Wednesday, and sometimes there's not a dry eye in the store when you read the letters. It's touching. How do you go from 14 to 1400? Is you create a culture where goodness is celebrated. And when goodness is celebrated, it multiplies. Well, we also believe that there is a right way to do business. There's a right way to do things. There's a right way to lead. And there's a wrong way. But there's a couple things about that we believe. We believe that even though we hire good people, we believe that good people can be tempted to do bad things. You know it. Ours is a world filled with temptation. It's all around us. And we believe that if we don't reinforce the formal values, the values that we want, the informal values that you may not want may take over. And we believe that, as I mentioned as I started this afternoon, that reflection time is critical. You need to think about what you're doing. Because here's what happens. We'll bring in good people who did something they should not have been doing. As a matter of fact, 98% of our terminations are because somebody did something that broke our ethics code. And we'll say, what were you thinking when you did that? And when we ask them as adults, their response is the same response that you got from your kids when you asked them that question. What were you thinking when you did that? And what did they say? I don't know. I don't know. Good people, but they just didn't think about what they were doing. Here's how my parents instilled it in me. So I mentioned the first 7 years of my life we lived in South Milwaukee. And that's where my parents purchased for me my first bicycle. And that bicycle was meant for the sidewalks of South Milwaukee. It had nice smooth tires on it. When I was 7, we moved up to Hallie. A lot of the roads, now especially the roads in front of our house, were gravel roads. So that bike with the nice city slicker smooth tires wasn't very good on the gravel roads. All my new buddies had those 20-inch bikes that had the knobby BMX tires on them. Remember those? And they could fly. I couldn't keep up. So one night I said to my dad, Dad, can I get new tires for my bike? What's the matter, are your tires flat? No, they're not flat, but they're not knobby, and I can't keep up with the other guys. The other guys can go faster than I can. And they're not flat? No. Pedal faster. You ain't getting your tires. So one night, I was riding into town, and the spot where our gravel road ends and the blacktop begins, as you got into the village limits, there was a cable across the road. It had not been there the day before. So later, when I got home, I said, Hey, Dad, you know where the gravel road ends and the blacktop begins? There's a cable across the road. What's that for? It wasn't there yesterday. He said, well, is it attached to a little black box in the ditch? Yeah. He said, well, it's a meter. It's a sensor that the Department of Transportation puts there. And every time a car goes across the cable, the way to the car registers a little click in the box. And then at the end of the month, they'll pick up the box, and they'll see how many clicks there are. And if there's a lot of clicks, it means we have a lot of traffic on our road. And they'll upgrade our road from a gravel road to you know where this story's going to, don't you? So as soon as I found this out, I beelined it down to that spot in the gravel road, and I started jumping on this cable. Well, as a 58-pound weakling, that was not enough to send a little click in the box. But again, I like science. I remember my science. Force equals mass times acceleration. So I went to my dad's garage. He was a construction worker, and I grabbed this 10-pound sledgehammer. Thinking if I can hit this cable dead center, that'll be enough to send a click in the box. So I walked down there to the spot, and I start whacking at this cable in the middle of the road. And every time I was lucky enough to hit the cable dead center, you heard this little mechanical click. I'm like, sweet. So I'm whacking at this cable. Well, much to my demise, there's a house right there. It's owned by John Zajikowski. John Zajikowski is a retired police officer from Wausau. So he looked out the front window and he sees me with the sledgehammer. He poked his head out the front door. I said, Johnny, what are you doing? Oh, hey, I'm getting us a blacktop road. Get home right now. Da-da-da. So I walked into the garage with a sledgehammer in my hands, and there's my mom and dad waiting for me. Busted. Mr. Zajikowski had to call Mr. and Mrs. McHugh and tell them what Johnny was up to. And so my mom said, Johnny, what were you thinking when you did this? Well, this is not, I don't know. I knew exactly what I was doing. I said, I'm getting us a blacktop road. My mom said, do you think that's the right way to get a blacktop road? Johnny, you know better than that. And so this is what they did for me for a punishment. For the next month, when chores were done that night, I had to go into my bedroom. I'm going to date myself on this one too. I had to shut my bedroom door, and I had to sit in my red vinyl beanbag chair and listen to a 33, an album of the Letterman singing inspirational songs. For an entire month, every night. I still have the whole album memorized. Old Man River, that old man. I had the whole album. My mom said, Johnny, because if you'll just sit and think about what you would do, that there is a right way and a wrong way, you'll probably choose the right way if you think about it. We do. We need reflection time. Ours is a world filled with temptation. Most of us on this planet are good. So sometimes why do we make bad decisions? It's because we haven't taken time to think about it. And if we take time to think of it because we're all good men, you know what? We come to the right decision. You know it. You know your goodness. You know that if it's been inspired, if you've ever put your head down at night and you went, ugh. If you've ever felt guilty about something, if you've ever felt guilty about something, that's an excellent sign. It means you're a good person. Only good people feel guilty. Bad people don't. They don't have any remorse. That's why they keep on doing it. So if you ever put the head on the pillow at night and you went, oh, thank your parents. They raised you well. Thank the Creator you've been given a conscience that you still have. But you can lose it if you don't take time to think about what we do and the implications. We also believe that good things happen. You can do things the right way in terms of leadership if we do it together. That none of us is called to do this by ourselves. And I don't think it's accidental that our Lord sent them out 2 by 2. He did not send them out one at a time. And here's the reason. Even as individuals, as wise as we are, as much time as we spend in morning prayer or contemplation or reflection, there's always a chance that as an individual we could find ourselves making the wrong choice. But if we get a bunch of us together, we're all good people, and we say, you know, I prayed about this, I thought about this, I reflect on what decision should we make, we put our heads together, we'll make the right decision. Here's where I learned it. Before I worked at Kwik Trip, I've been in Kwik Trip 14 years. The 10 years prior to that, I actually taught high school, taught religion. And I would vacation every summer with 2 friends of mine, Mike and George. Mike and George are also educators at various different levels. At the time, all 3 of us were bachelors. Mike and George are very staid in their ways, so we would always vacation every summer, the same time of the year, same place, same pattern every day. It was always the 3rd week of August, before school started. And we'd always go to Door County. We'd always leave on Sunday, come back on Thursday. And the pattern every day, all the years, was this. First of all, we'd go to breakfast at Al Johnson's, AJ's. Those of you who've ever been there, the place with the goats on the roof, you know. Have eggs and bacon. Then we would go to Sister Bay to a place called Mance Specialty Foods. It was owned by Eunice and Larry Mance. They would have packed for us a picnic basket lunch. We'd pick up that picnic basket lunch, then we'd go to Newport State Park, Lake Michigan side, put the picnic basket lunch underneath the shade tree. And then for the next 3 hours, we would float on these cheap inflatable rafts that we bought in Sturgeon Bay going up on Sunday. And as we were floating in the rafts, our eyes would be shut, but we'd be talking about what we're going to teach that year. They want to know what McHugh stories I was going to use, what books we had been reading. And as you were talking there, your eyes shut, if you heard the voices of George and Mike getting a little farther away, you realized you were drifting away. You paddled up a little bit faster. Now, where we went in Newport State Park was very significant. Because if those of you who've ever been there, you know that you can go hundreds of yards out, and the water's still only knee deep. That's significant. Because neither George nor I swim very well. And Mike's a bad swimmer. I'm actually deathly afraid of deep water. Now, it wasn't from Dad throwing me in the lake, but just saying. And we did this for years, with one exception. It was a summer that was so incredibly hot. It was the summer that matter of fact, Corey Stringer from the Minnesota Vikings died from heat stroke. You might remember that summer. Well, that summer we thought, in that heat, it's probably not wise to pick up the picnic basket lunch and then let it sit underneath the shade tree for 3 hours and then eat it. So that year we changed it up. We'd go to breakfast, we'd go out to the beach. About 11 o'clock, one of us would go back into town and retrieve the picnic basket lunch and bring it out back to the beach and we'd share it. So Monday was my turn to go back into town and retrieve the lunch. Tuesday it was George's turn. Wednesday was so hot that there was only 2 places where you could get comfortable. Either in your car right in front of the air conditioner on full blast, or you didn't put all your air in the air mattress. And you floated in the water. You were mostly submerged, but yet you still floated. And it was just in heaven. So Wednesday, George and Mike said, it's too hot. We're going in the car, get some air conditioning. If you want, you can stay out here. I was comfortable. I said, let me be. Come back in a half hour. I woke up a half hour later to this. John. I woke up and I floated out there. Way out there. I'm talking like wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald down below me out there kind of thing. And I panicked because I don't swim well. George and Mike are bad swimmers. What do I do now? Well, I was so terrified. I paddled so hard and so fast If you ever know on one of those cheap inflatable rafts where the edges are glued together, and there's that metal, that's like a metal seam, so tough, so rough. By the time I paddled back to shore, I'd ripped all the skin off the underside of my armpits. And paddling, got back to shore, and the blood just streaming down my sides. Good news is I lived to tell the story. But here's what I learned. The only reason why I drifted off into the deep, dangerous waters is because I didn't have the voices of George and Mike around me. I was by myself. To be a good leader, a leader who has ethics, a leader who is driven by an ultimate purpose, we can't do it alone. But if we put our heads together and say, hang on, what are you talking about? What are you reading these days? Our chances of ending up in the deep, dangerous waters really get reduced. He sent them out 2 by 2, not one at a time. And that's why I'm so grateful to Keith and your whole team, because that's exactly what you're doing. Is you're getting good people together and saying, if we put our heads together and we spend this time together, we'll make good decisions. You do it as a group. We don't do it as individuals. So my last piece. To thank you for doing this. I'm a firm believer that there's some words that are so powerful we can't say them enough, especially as good men. Things like, I thank you. I do interviews for people who want to come into the corporate office at Kwik Trip, and I'll say, why do you want to work for Kwik Trip? Never once have I heard this. Well, I've worked in the other company for 20 years, and every week my boss comes to me and thanks me, praises me, and I'm just getting sick and tired of hearing it. I want to go someplace where I don't. I do hear the opposite. I worked for 20 years in this place. I've never heard a thank you. I just want to go someplace where I feel appreciated. Thank you, you can't say it enough. Here's another phrase I don't think we can say enough. As I mentioned, I grew up in this little town near Wausau, Hallie. One Saturday night we went to church, and in the front pew was an old couple by the name of Dan and Pearl. They were celebrating their 50th anniversary of marriage. So they were going to renew their wedding vows that night. And our pastor, instead of doing the traditional sermon, decided to bring the portable microphone down to Dan and Pearl. Say, Dan, Pearl, we have a lot of young couples in the congregation. Newly married, some about to be married. You made it 50 years. Why don't you give us your secret to success? Give us your advice. How'd you make it 50 years? Well, Pearl grabs the microphone and she goes on and on and on all those things that she thought made a great marriage. Problem solving, of never letting the sun set in her anger, of balancing the checkbook, of making good meals, and blah, 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 blah. Well, finally she paused for just a second to catch her breath, and our pastor grabbed the microphone from her, because otherwise she'd have kept on going. I'd still be there, He said, well, Pearl, thank you for that. Dan, how did you make it 50 years? And they were both retired farmers. They didn't have any kids. And he grabs his microphone and turns around and smiles at the congregation and reveals the fact that he hadn't even put his false teeth in that night, and says, kept my mouth shut. Gave back the microphone. Well, just like you, the congregation just broke into laughter. It was a year later that we were at the funeral. His wife of then 51 years had died suddenly. They never had any kids, no grandkids, so it was a small funeral. And our tradition in Hallie is that if you were in 8th grade at the school, you also served for the funeral mass. So I was a server for that funeral. Our cemetery in Hallie is right next to the church. So after the prayers were finished inside the church, we went out to the graveside for the burial. When the prayers were finished at the graveside, old Dan looked on top of the coffin. He saw the flowers up there. He said, can I have one of those? Mike Schulte, who was our funeral director at the time, reached up, he grabbed a single red rose from the top of the coffin, and he gave it to Dan. And old Dan clutched that rose so hard, and he cried so hard his whole body shook. And he kept saying over and over again, I love her. I love her. I love her just as much now as I did 51 years ago when she held those flowers on our wedding day. I love her. And then he stopped. And you could tell that he was looking through 51 years worth of stories, And when he found the right story, he shared it with us. He said, when we were first married, we lived out on Pike Lake. It's just south of Hallie. He said, the first summer we were married, Pearl and I would go down to the dock and we'd take our shoes and stockings off and hold hands and put our feet in the water. We'd watch as a pair of loons would circle the lake, making that beautiful loon call. He said, I'm not a romantic kind of guy, but it was kind of romantic. He said, there first year of marriage, my lovely bride, watching the sunset, listening to the loons, feet in the water, down at the lake. It was awesome. He said the second summer the drake didn't come, or only the drake returned. Its mate didn't come back. The drake is a much larger bird. And then Dan told me something that I didn't know. He said, loons mate for life. And when they go south for the winter, they separate. When they're down south apart from each other in the winter months, they physically cannot make that loon call. They only make the sound when they're together as a couple. So he said that drake circled the lake day after day, night after night, unable to open its beak, unable to make that beautiful sound. It didn't have its mate. He said the third summer, the drake didn't come back either. He said, I don't know what happened to it, but my conclusion was this. It died. It lost its reason for its existence. It didn't have its mate. And he said, when I came to that conclusion that third summer, this is what I did every night for the next 47 years of our marriage. He said, even if it had been a holy war between Pearl and I that day, I'd get into bed and I'd grab Pearl's hand and say, Pearl, I love you. He said, I never missed a night of the last 47 years of our marriage to tell her that. Held those flowers, he said, I love her. I love her. The lovely and talented Maggie McHugh, my wife, came along the scene long after Dan and Pearl were around, but Maggie is the beneficiary of Dan's wisdom. Proud to say that my years of marriage, I've never missed a single night of telling her that. And I'm on the road quite a bit for what I do, like what I do with you. And the last thing I do at the hotel is I turn the light off, call Mags, and say, Mags, I love you. Now, I'm a schmuck as a husband. I know that in a lot of different ways, and most of us probably are. But the one thing that Maggie will always tell you if you ever meet her, she said, I know that my husband loves me because he tells me every day. She never grows tired of hearing that. I think as good leaders, as people who believe there are some words that are so powerful, we cannot say them enough. Our world needs to hear them. Things like thank you. Thank you for doing this, for gathering together. Phrases like, those of us who have significant others or spouses or kids, I love you. We can't say it enough. Things like, thank you for the great work that you do for those of us who work. When we do that, and we're caused to celebrate the goodness in our world, and we spend time in reflection, I think the goodness in our world only multiplies. Thank you for what you do. You do good work.